Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss 2010, the year we made contact. Starring Roy Scheider, John Lithgow, Bob Balaban, Helen Mirren, and Keir Dullea from the last movie, and directed by Peter Hyams. And before I get into this review, I must say I've heard of this movie, but I've never seen it before. And let's see how it is for my first two viewings, because I watched it twice for this show. So let's see how this goes. We recap what happened from 2001 A Space Odyssey, and we learn Dave, returned briefly by Keir Dullea, said a line like, "Oh my god, it's full of stars." And we move on to 2010, and we get the amazing score from last time, and we move on to a field full of giant dishes, where we meet Dr. Hayward Floyd, played by Roy Scheider, as he's encountered by a man in black who's also a scientist and has a proposition for Dr. Floyd, where he goes to Jupiter to see what happened to Dave in Jupiter. As he has a team with other Americans as well as Russians, Dr. Floyd visits an old colleague named Victor Milson about the proposition the man in black tells him, as he has to go as he wants to find out what happened to Dave in 2001. Dr. Floyd goes to Dr. R. Chandra, played by Bob Balaban, who created the HAL 9000, as well as its sister Sal 9000, who's voiced by Candice Bergen. Where I really enjoyed in Miss Congeniality in 2000, as Dr. Chandra wants Hal to be reborn and be more intelligent. Dr. Floyd is married to Caroline with a son named Christopher, and they have dolphins inside their house with a pool, as he tells her about the mission, which will take him at least 2 years, maybe more, and a half years. Oh, 2.5 years, excuse me, to get back to Earth, as Caroline is devastated as Dr. Floyd works out and exercises for the mission. And this isn't as slowly paced in a spectacular way like 2001 was. And I do like Dr. Floyd and Dr. Chandra as characters, and I'm following this a little better, but it isn't as good as 2001 in my opinion. We're now on the mission and we meet Dr. Walter Karnow, played by John Lithgow, and Tanya Book, played by Helen Mirren, as well as some others whom I didn't get their names on the first viewing, but maybe it'll take me 2 viewings to know their names. And I like the crew as we're introduced to them. While at the beginning of the mission, I don't quite understand the dialogue, except they have to get to Jupiter to see what happened to Dave, and I'm following that perfectly, but the movie is kind of boring me like half to death. But does that make it a bad movie? No, because I like the characters and it's telling a good story, even though there are times it's boring. But that's how I felt about 2001 originally. Because when I first saw that film, I fell asleep because it was boring. But it took me multiple viewings to like it even better than I did the first time. But here, it's boring, but it'll probably grow a little bit because I like the characters and the story is good, and I didn't fall asleep on my first viewing, thank God, of this, despite I don't know what's going on in this movie. But it's not a bad time like Doom Annihilation was, for example. They arrive at the site of Jupiter, and Dr. Karnow and the other guy get to the ship where Hal is in, while Dr. Kurnow is afraid of heights and is breathing rather heavily and can't breathe, and eventually they get in the ship as they find Hal asleep. And the other guy takes the glass off on his helmet off and figures out there's oxygen in the ship, and they're playing a comedic moment which didn't make me laugh at all, by the way. Then they check the systems to see if anything is working on that ship, as Dr. Chandra puts the voice back together as he pushes his voice boxes back together, and it finally fixes Hal's voice, and they question Hal to find out what happened to Dave on the mission in 2001. And I like Hal back as the creepy presence, and the actor voicing Hal, aka Douglas Rain is the perfect for the voice of Hal, and as Hal sounds evil, but here he sounds more innocent, as he doesn't remember what happened to Dave, and I'm enjoying being in this world, but not as much as 2001. Meanwhile, we get this weird scene where Dave's widow is seeing Dave on the TV, which, while she was watching the news, and the reason it's so weird is how could Dave be on Earth while on Jupiter? Honestly, this scene is just very weird. Dave communicates with Dr. Floyd by sending messages through Hal as Dr. Floyd turns around and sees Dave as Dr. Floyd follows him, and we see Dave as an older man. Which is again another weird scene as they communicate as Dr. Floyd is there and Dave is a ghost. And the movie gets rather weird as he explains to Tanya. Dave says to leave the spacecraft where Jupiter is in the next 2 days, or else they're dead. And she believes, just like Dr. Floyd, that it sounds crazy as they don't have enough fuel to get back to Earth, as they see something that makes them think it might be dangerous to stay near Jupiter, which does sound incredibly crazy. The crew hears about what Dr. Floyd hears from Dave, and they put some fuel in the ship and they get prepared to get away from Jupiter, and Dr. Chandra says his goodbyes to Hal as he takes off with the crew, with Hal going AI on him, despite he doesn't remember what happened to Dave nor Frank in 2001. They get out of there as they get Dr. Chandra on board the moving ship, and Dave sends a message to Earth saying, let me see if I'm saying this right, all these worlds are yours except Europa. Attempt no landing there, use them together, use them in peace. As the crew sees the message, and Dr. Floyd sends a message to Christopher, as it'll be the last time Dr. Floyd will speak to Christopher and Caroline as he goes on to a long sleep. And we end with a spectacular score from 2001, and the climax is good, but not as great as 2001. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this movie a 6.8 out of 10. Not as good as 2001, but I still liked it as the characters are interesting. The story is pretty good, and Hal is the best presence in this movie. There are some weird scenes in this movie, and I do like the score from 2001 briefly back, and some people won't give this a chance because of the influence of 2001 being a classic, but I'd say give this one a chance, as it's a good movie, but not as great as 2001, but I still think it's a good movie. So I would like to thank you guys for joining me, and until whenever we get, I guess never, but until then, I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't let you do that.